A Child is Born, A Beginner's Guide to Nativity Stories by Amy Jill Levine. This is Chapter 4, Jesus Heir to Traditions, pages 83 through 92. Jesus, Heir to Traditions. In outlining and then rewriting the introduction in the first 3 chapters of this book, I kept finding connections to Jesus. Some are already well known, and I did not want this volume to repeat my nativity study, Light of the World. Readers of the Bible should be more or less familiar with how Matthew models the nativity scenes on the life of Moses. Endangered baby, flight to Egypt, return from Egypt, crossing water, the baptism, temptation in the wilderness, then ascending a mountain, as Moses went up Mount Sinai to teach Torah to his followers. Well known also is how Matthew quotes Isaiah chapter 7 verse 14 in the Greek to show that the virginal conception of Jesus to Mary fulfills prophecy. In reading Matthew 1 through 2 and Luke 1 through 2 in the light of or with attentions to the echoes sounding from the earlier text, we see much more. This vision or hearing goes in multiple directions. On the one hand, the comparison helps us notice overlooked parts of the Gospels. On the other, when we read the older stories after reading the Gospels, we can find new things there too. This back and forth model is substantially how memory works. As we retell the stories of our past, whether personal or familial or community-based, we adapt those stories based on our own new experiences and on the needs of our audiences. Memory also takes discrete moments and then organizes them, as if putting beads of different sizes and colors on a string, determining what to forego, what to juxtapose, and what to ignore. The authors we call Matthew and Luke, the original texts are anonymous, had in their memories the stories of the births of Ishmael and Isaac, Moses, Samson, and Samuel. They expected some who would read their Gospels to know those stories, draw connections, and encourage members in their assemblies to become better familiar with the Septuagint, the scriptures these Greek speakers had. Matthew and Luke did not know the word Christmas, and they would not have thought of Santa Claus and elves, tinsel and stockings, carols and trees and candy canes, the Grinch and Burgermeister Meisterburger. If we move away from these later stories and tradition and move backward to the ancient Hebrew text, we find that good stories beget good stories, that there is delight in plays on conventions, that the stories prompt us to ask questions not only about the narratives they present, but also about our own lives and values. We find that the stories in the Old Testament help birth the stories in the Gospels. As I read and reread the stories in Genesis, Judges, and 1 Samuel, here are several of the vignettes that surfaced. Attention to Joseph. Birth stories tend, appropriately, to feature mothers, and the husbands recede into the background. Abraham impregnates Hagar but refuses to stop Sarah's abuse, and then acquiesces to Sarah's demand that mother and child be expelled. We have no record of his speaking to Hagar either before the pregnancy or after. She must have told him what to name their child, but the Bible does not record the conversation. Concerning Isaac's birth, Sarah has the last word. Mr. Manoah is not the swiftest Danite in the late Bronze Age, and Elkanah, supportive as he is, becomes overshadowed by Hannah, and then replaced as a father both by Eli the priest and by God. Yet, we can recover the stories of fathers. When Sarah orders Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away, the Bible tells us, the matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. Genesis chapter 21, verse 11. I imagine that Elkanah was very distressed when he learned that Hannah had vowed to give their son to God by entrusting him to Eli at Shiloh. Both Abraham and Elkanah had other children, but one does not substitute for another. Manoah appears to feel left out already at the Annunciation, as if he could not be part of his son's life. The Bible notices and affirms not only maternal but also paternal love, paternal emotion, and paternal loss. Real men in the Bible have and show feelings. The Stoics gave us stoicism. Ancient Israel gives us honest emotions. attention to these men brings me to Joseph. While Joseph is prominently featured in Matthew's nativity account, he is never named in Mark's Gospel. John mentions him twice as Jesus, son of Joseph, John chapter 1, verse 45, and then again in chapter 6, verse 42. But the extensive references to God as Father in John fully overshadow Joseph. In introducing Joseph, Luke neatly tucks him between references to Mary. In the 6th month, that is, the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary. Luke chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. For Luke, Joseph's role is to provide Mary a fiancé, and to provide Jesus a connection to King David. He receives no angelic annunciation or revelatory dream. After Mary receives the annunciation, she doesn't go to Joseph. Instead, she leaves town to visit her cousin Elizabeth, and she stays with Elizabeth for 3 months, Luke chapter 1, verse 56. That is, until Elizabeth is in her 9th month and is ready to give birth. 3 months, and there was no word about Joseph. The next time Luke mentions Joseph is in the next chapter, where, following the notice of the Roman census, we read, Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. Luke chapter 2, verse 4. Now, it is Joseph's turn to travel, but while Mary had gone alone to Judea, Joseph takes Mary with him. I like to think that he did not want to leave her alone, and that he wanted to be with Mary when she gave birth. I like to think that Mary wanted Joseph to be there as well. Joseph's connection to Bethlehem provides the rationale for Mary, who lives in Nazareth, to give birth to the son of David, in the city of David, since Joseph went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. Luke chapter 2, verse 5. But he is more than his lineage, as are Abraham, Amram, Moses' father, Manoah, and Elkanah. Then, nothing about Joseph until the shepherds find Mary and Joseph and the child lying in the manger. Luke chapter 2, verse 16. Joseph has been present throughout. To find Mary and the child is to find him. That Luke again tucks him in grammatically between Mary and the child reminds me of that earlier verse. In the 6th month, Mary. Now, he can be seen as the center point who cares for both. He is important here for his presence, not just for his lineage. Finally, Luke mentions that the family went to Jerusalem for pilgrimage festivals, chapter 2, verse 41, as Elkanah and his family went to Shiloh to offer sacrifices and to pray. One year they started the return home without noticing that the boy Jesus had remained behind. Jesus at this time is 12 years old enough for a sense of personal responsibility. I doubt Luke's story is simply an earlier version of the Home Alone movies, with the less than adept parents. They expected Jesus to be responsible, and in ways they could not yet understand he was. Finding Jesus in the Jerusalem temple, an enormous edifice, Mary asks, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously looking for you." Luke chapter 2, verse 48. By your father, she means Joseph. She names Joseph father. She values him. Mary explains that not only she, but also Joseph have been frantic in their seeking. Jesus replies, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" Luke chapter 2, verse 49. Or about the matters of my father? Joseph is standing right there. The comment is heartbreaking. I shudder to imagine how Joseph reacted. Mary refers to Joseph as the boy's father, but Jesus rejects the relationship. Luke 2:50 explains that Mary and Joseph did not understand what he said to them. Socially, Jesus is an adolescent, and adolescents are not always articulate. Theologically, they do not understand, even with Gabriel's annunciation to Mary, what this child will do. The next verse notes that Jesus went down with them. One always goes up to and down from Jerusalem to Nazareth and was obedient to them. Both parents came back with him. He attended to both. Luke notes that his mother treasured all these things in her heart, verse 51, but does not note what Joseph thought. 12 years earlier, when Mary and Joseph together presented baby Jesus in the temple, Simeon told Mary that a sword will pierce your own soul, Luke chapter 2, verse 35. That sword would have also pierced Joseph's soul. The final line in this story and our last notice of Joseph, Luke chapter 2, verse 52, is that Jesus increased in wisdom and in years or stature and in divine and human favor. In showing obedience to Mary and Joseph, perhaps part of this wisdom, the wisdom of an adolescent growing up, is the recognition of what Joseph had done for him. The Proto-Evangelium of James depicts Joseph as an elderly man at the time that he and Mary wed, and Joseph promises to guard Mary's virginity. Historically, Joseph would have been about 30 and Mary about 20, the average age Jewish men and women married at the time. If we think of him as elderly, then we can easily explain his absence in the stories of Jesus' adult life by determining that he had died. Today we speak of the heartbreak of mothers who lose their children. We have Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. There are the Madres de Plaza de Mayo in Buenos Aires, who began protesting over their disappeared children back in 1977. In Iran is the group known as Mourning Mothers. In China are the Tiananmen Mothers. In Turkey there are the Saturday Mothers. The organization Madre has a global outreach. The list goes on. Mary and Elizabeth, women whose sons are killed by government officials, are precursors of these groups. Just as earlier in the biblical tradition are other mothers whose sons have died, starting with Eve. These mothers are joined by Mrs. Manoah, whose son Samson, captured by the Philistines, dies in captivity. Jesus' last words to Joseph are heartbreaking. But I imagine that Joseph knows his son will forge his own path and forgives him for this unintended hurt. Stories parents tell their children. In both Matthew and Luke, one of Joseph's major roles, if not the major role, is to anchor Jesus into David's family. Paul is also concerned about this connection, for he begins his letter to the Romans by speaking of the gospel concerning his son, who was descended from David according to the flesh, Romans chapter 1, verse 3. Paternity is not the only deciding factor of identity. Indeed, sometimes it goes missing. In putting all these stories together, I suddenly realized, sometimes I'm slow, that Moses is raised by Pharaoh's daughter, but there is no indication that someone plays the father role in the Egyptian palace. Nor does his biological father, Amram, play a role in the Bible other than the notice that he was the father of Aaron, Miriam, and Moses. Samson's ostensive father, Manoah, will attempt to control his son, and he will fail. Samuel is raised by the priest Eli, himself the failed father of Hophni and Phinehas, his two sons who abuse their priestly privileges. In comparison to all these other father figures, both Elkanah and Joseph come out on top. Elkanah takes care of Hannah the best he can, and he, like Joseph, will lose his child to divine service. He, like Joseph in Luke's account, lacks an annunciation scene. He is absent when Hannah prays and then speaks with Eli, just as Joseph is absent when Gabriel speaks to Mary. I wonder what Joseph would have told young Jesus about King David. That he was Jesse's seventh son, not the first, and that God cares more about what one does than about the right of succession belonging to a firstborn child? That David's great-grandmother was Ruth the Moabite? Joseph may have explained that Ruth worked together with Naomi to secure their future, just as the midwives, Pharaoh's daughter, Moses' mother, and Moses' sister all worked together to thwart Pharaoh's plans. These stories tell us that traditional enemies, such as the Moabites and the Egyptians, could be friends, and that not all people agree with their government's policies. Joseph might have mentioned that God promised David a perpetual kingdom. According to 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 8 through 17, the prophet Nathan tells David that he was chosen from following the sheep to be a prince over my people Israel, and that God promises him, when your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I can easily imagine little Jesus having dreams about King David, his father's 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 father. Was that genealogy a call to him, a sense of his own fate? What other stories did Joseph tell Jesus about his genealogy? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Perez, Boaz, the husband of Ruth, Joshua, the husband of Rahab, not a biblical notice, but a midrashic one, King David and King Solomon, Jehoshaphat. I bet father and son had fun, even jumped up and down when they got to his name. Hezekiah and Josiah. When they got to Jacob, the father of Joseph, I picture little Jesus, who knew his Bible story, saying, "Didn't we already talk about Jacob, the fellow who dreamed about a stairway to heaven, and his son Joseph, who also dreamed dreams?" Joseph would explain that the names are the same, and then perhaps ask Jesus, "What does the idea that you are the son of Joseph, the son of Jacob, suggest to you? How do you understand your past, and how might that understanding prompt you to think about your future?" Each name comes with a story. Here's a story about the genealogy that little Jesus may have heard. Matthew chapter 1, verse 4 mentions Amminadab, the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Nahshon appears in Exodus chapter 6, verse 23, which states that Aaron, Moses' brother, married Elishab, daughter of Amminadab, spelled differently, and sister of Nahshon. John the Baptizer's mother is named Elizabeth, the Greek version of Elisheba. One midrash, Numbers Rabbah 13, notes that when Moses led the children of Israel out of Egyptian slavery into the shore of the Red Sea, or Reed Sea, the people feared drowning. Only when Nahshon ben Hebrew, for son of Amminadab, brother of Elisheba, put his foot in the sea did the waters part. In one version of this story, Nahshon waded into the water, deeper and deeper, until it was up to his neck, and then the waters parted. Miracles do occur, but we must be willing to risk all in partnership with the divine. Jesus learned this lesson.